Today, we actually recently recorded an episode around the idea of autonomy and alignment. But that episode was geared to leaders. And today we're going to talk about the implications of this dynamic for the classroom teacher. How do you align with the rest of your school, the rest of your district, as far as
Right. And why is that important?
Right. Like alignment is important.
Maybe it's not.
Also respecting your autonomy and your professional judgment. Like, is it possible for those two things to be true? That I can align and also still have autonomy to make instructional decisions that I know work best for me and my students?
And I know that in that previous episode, which I think was, if you have to go back, it's a couple of months ago that we unpacked that. So if you're rewinding, you look for the words autonomy in your episode title. But I know that when we talked about that, most folks think about this pull, this tug of war that happens between having freedom and flexibility, full autonomy, and the opposite side of that is like, no autonomy and alignment. It's like we're all in a line, we're all lockstep, but it's like we were viewing it. It's not a number line continuum, right? It's not a linear continuum here. It's actually like it's like a space. It's actually like a two-dimensional space. So you're thinking about like your grid, your coordinate grids. It's like you've got autonomy along, say, one of those axes, but then vertically you've got the other, like, which is alignment, which means now you've got four different quadrants means we could have high autonomy, high alignment, but low autonomy, low alignment, and those are opposite ends of the quadrant, or the quadrants, in say the Cartesian space. So that's the way we're going to maybe position this too, is to think about this four kind of quadrant areas when we're thinking about this as not just a either or, but actually more complex than that.
Well, and I think today's episode too, we're going to talk about, and we're going to like pick a scenario that happens quite often, because I think it's good to kind of ground this conversation. And we're going to talk about, when the district or a school mandates a new resource and or a new, say, scope and sequence. And this one, it's close to my heart because we were involved on both sides of this sort of scenario as classroom teachers. And we were also the ones on the other end working at the district office, trying to implement sometimes a new core resource or a new scope and sequence. Specifically, my recollection is back during the COVID period. And this is incredibly challenging because as a district, we're trying to get aligned and we're trying to do things for the right reason, which is to make sure that all students have the best opportunity to learn and understand mathematics. However, oftentimes this can maybe unintentionally hinder or encroach on the autonomy of the teacher. And we kind of want to talk about this, like, how do we go about doing this in a way that we can make teachers feel confident that making these changes does in fact make sense? And what do you do when maybe you're an educator and you're sort of wondering, and I remember feeling this way myself, was like, I've spent a lot of time and energy to put together my specific math program for this specific course or this specific grade. And now someone's coming in and sort of telling me to do it a completely different way, possibly, right? Maybe it's in line, maybe it's not, maybe it's somewhere in between. But this is incredibly challenging. And really, I'm going to argue that it's hard on both sides, right? Because both sides want the best for the student. So I want to go back to Yvette. What are you thinking when we are in a situation where a school or a district is, in fact, implementing a new resource or a scope and sequence, or maybe it's the combination of the two, and we want to make sure that we do aim for alignment, but we also don't want to go to the point where someone feels like autonomy has completely been lost. What's floating through your mind right now?
I think that I have two answers, and one is my past self, how I would have responded, and then how my current self would respond. I feel like when I was in the classroom, I had, and we talked about this, it's almost like false confidence. I was so, and you guys both know this about me, my strong convictions. I really felt like I had such a good grasp on the grade 6 curriculum, and I understood the grade 6 learner, and I'd invested so much of my own time and energy to designing my own scope and sequence and my own lessons. And I was only leveraging some board provided resources because I essentially created a program from scratch. pulling from some high quality instructional materials.
And you're probably seeing success.
I was carving my own path.
Yep.
And I felt like I was seeing success. And I think that had someone come in at that point in my career and said, scrap the long range plans you've put hours and hours and hours thinking about and develop, and use this one instead, I think I probably would have felt defeated, not valued,
revolted.
Yeah,
because that's what I would have done
for sure.
Right? Because I the way that you just outlined that was definitely. And here's the interesting thing is, like, I think you're saying that was you early, but it's like I felt like that was me later, because it's like I've been doing so much thinking and learning that, say, the district hadn't given any sort of alignment or guidance towards. And so then if I was, because this never happened to me being a high school teacher, they're like, my district was like, hey, what textbook are you using? And so like that whole scope and sequence wasn't really there for us, at that level. So my head was like, I've built a program that I think has been, having some success. And if at that point, if someone said like, no, throw that out the window, we're all doing this, I would be like, there's no way I'm doing that. And unless it was like, this is exactly what I'm doing already. Like if it was perfectly aligned with what I was trying to do in my mind, like my puzzle, like when we talk about that all the time, is like my puzzle is built and the district's puzzle looks like my puzzle. Awesome. Let me see what you got. Maybe there's something better there for me to fit this in. But the way that you were positioning this is like, hey, here's something else you have to do. Ooh, that's where my revolt felt like was going to take over.
Well, I want to talk about two sides here, because it sounds like former Yvette and current John. Is that what you're saying? I'm not really
think
sure.
So.
But
I think so.
And I respect.
I'm gonna like hold back a little, like not hold back, but I'm gonna put a little pin in there, because I reserve the right to like comment on that comment a little later.
Yeah,
I think I'm
and
going
I don't
to.
mean it to be bad. I
know.
I'm joking here, but I think though, like what you're saying, John, is like, it's almost like the longer you plan, the longer you put time and effort into building your program, growing it, testing it, trying it. Sadly, it's like we're testing it on, 20 years worth of kids before we're like, yeah, now we've got the perfect one, right? Like this is the problem. There's sort of two aspects here. Like there's the side that I feel bad for folks like you that have put the time and the effort and the energy into developing the programs you had developed. But then there's the other end of the spectrum what about the other teachers that like haven't put the same time, thought, or energy into it, or maybe they just aren't as well positioned to be able to do some of that thinking. So it's like the hard part about this when it comes to alignment is that autonomy is amazing in some classrooms with how certain teachers utilize it. However, they're still maybe not aligned, which causes a little bit of problem. But then the big worry is like having too much autonomy in a classroom where maybe the teacher actually isn't able or willing to put in that same amount of time, effort, energy. And like, what does that program look like? And then when we zoom out, and we talk about this with our district leaders all the time, we zoom out and then we start to see those pockets of success happening, but we're missing that sort of consistency, that sustainable from year to year success that really will help to impact or influence a student's math trajectory. Lots here. Yvette, you had mentioned old you, but you said there's two parts, and I don't think we got to the second part.
We jumped on her.
So come back to, like, I think she's going to talk about new Yvette or current Yvette. What's different now compared to that thinking that you had when you were in the classroom?
I think that now I would be totally open to the journey, because I recognize that my classroom is not a silo. It's part of a system, and that it's not just about me and the learning experience with the students in front of me. And so I guess I'll elaborate more on that. If I want to share experiences and build capacity in others around me, it's like the more aligned we are, the more opportunities there are for conversations, for moderated marking, for us to be using the same assessments. And then it becomes a lot more cohesive and collective, and we're all working toward the same goal. We're teaching the same units at the same time, so we're having conversations about the content, because we're all living in the world of fractions right now. and we're living and breathing fractions, and there's opportunity for more collaboration, more partnering. I think that as I mentioned before, I had such a false confidence that I believed the program that I had built was the best program. And I think now I would be willing to step into somebody else's understanding of the curriculum and experience their journey that would actually only strengthen mine. So imagine I have my own idea of how to unpack and how to deliver the grade 6 content, but I commit this year, because the board just bought a new resource, to actually using that resource with fidelity. I believe that by using that resource with fidelity, if it's a high quality instructional material, I will actually become stronger, because I'm going to get another interpretation of those same standards or expectations. Here's where I keep my autonomy, though. And that's what we talked about, right? Like, these two things don't have to compete.
That's right.
I can follow the scope and sequence. I can support the implementation of the core resource, but I can still build in additional fluency routines in a spiraled way. I can have centers that bring in, like, let's say the scope and sequence doesn't bring in division until later in the year, but I'm like, no way. I can't wait until January. I bring that into my centers really early on. I do Friday cumulative review of key concepts. Like, I think that there's a way to align while also still maintaining my integrity of what I believe good practices and will get me the best outcomes for students. I don't think it has to be one or the other.
And what I'm imagining in my mind is what it sounds to me like is that the new implementation of this resource, this scope and sequence, it sounds like there's enough flexibility that we're not talking about a completely scripted day by day, thou shalt say and do these exact things. There is some flexibility there, which I think is really important to note as well for the district leaders that might be ready to implement a new resource, is going, okay, I need to make sure that I'm saving some autonomy here, that we can't get this down to scripted where if I walk into this classroom, I know they're going to be saying paragraph 3 on page 148. We need to have enough flexibility there so that there are opportunities. And what I was imagining in my mind is, I think old Kyle, kind of, I guess I'm on Yvette's side here a little bit. Kyle would have been very, like, I would have been hard pressed to change my very, very specifically planned long range plan for any of my courses. However, I would argue that since John, you and I went on the journey to do interleaving and spiraling, I think that process opens the door to make it a whole lot easier for someone to be able to say, this is the scope and sequence we're looking at. I can live with that, because like when I spiraled, I basically took my old plan and I was like, throw this in a blender and let's see. Now, not recommending you do that approach. I learned a lot by doing it. There has to be intention. There should be a very specific reason why you're going to spiral in the way you're spiraling. That, like, it allowed me to realize that the order that I did things in, it wasn't like Monday's lesson's going to make or break Thursday's lesson, right? Now, mind you, if Thursday's lesson is, much deeper from the concept, of course, that would be important. But ultimately, you can move things around and you can do things differently and still come out with very either similar, maybe even better results. And therefore, I think it really just comes to maybe like giving up full control, because as educators, we are known to want control. We want discipline in the classroom management. We want things to happen a certain way. And I think really what this is all about is us being able to say, while I maybe prefer or like or am used to doing things a certain way, I can give up some of that, and it's not going to make or break whether I'm a successful teacher or not, or whether my students are going to be successful in my classroom. So it really, I think, comes down to just being a little bit more flexible. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up all the autonomy either, right? And I think that's where the balancing act really comes from, getting that dot in that Cartesian plane you're talking about, like getting it somewhere in the, we're going to call it quadrant 1, somewhere in the middle there, where we get a nice sort of diagonal line, going all the way up.
these are the epiphanies that I think that we've had over our careers, is that we've had strongly held beliefs, but we've realized that we need to loosely hold them. We've talked about that idea a number of times. And Yvette, you had strong beliefs and you strongly held them, but you learned to like say, I have strong beliefs, but I'm going to loosely hold them because I can mold, what I have here for a bigger cause, because now you've got to realize that there are bigger things, and I want to be part of the system. I want to be part of growth outside of my classroom. And when I have that flexibility, that belief that the work that we're doing is beyond the walls in my room, my students, then it opens those, it opens that collaborating doors. And all of a sudden now we can move together and I can be that leader that I need to be. When we have those strongly held beliefs, or you're working with teachers that have those strongly beliefs, they're strongly held, then those are hard to like move forward as a group. And I think this are the epiphanies that we've had, along the way. And I think what we want to do is go, how do we help our fellow colleagues have similar epiphanies about, loosely holding some beliefs, because we could be working with someone who has done the work that we did, but then says like, I realize that you're providing me a scope and sequence, and the department or the grade level is going to move that way, but I'm not doing it. Right? Because I'm going to hold my beliefs strongly held. And now you've got that person. So it's like, well, we've got to help that person, slowly build trust, slowly build that culture to like say like, these are okay things to have. Like, you've done some really great work here, but we are moving this way. And that's sometimes hard, to work with in a department or in a grade level team.
When I think about this discussion, maybe these are sort of things to think about regardless of which side of the situation, the table you're on. If you're a classroom teacher or you're someone working in the leadership team that's going to be implementing a new curriculum or a new resource scope and sequence, is really being able to feel confident that whatever your stance, your current stance is, that you can articulate the why behind it. And I think this is really important, is being able to, if I'm a classroom teacher doing things the way I'm doing them, being able to articulate like why you have been doing them that way and why you maybe prefer to do it that way, but then keeping the open mind to hear the other side. And that also goes for the leadership team to be able to come in and to be able to be very clear around why we've selected this resource instead of another, why we've done the scope and sequence in the way, like what's the purpose, like what are we hoping to achieve in doing so. And that really comes down to that visioning, right? And planning, like why we're doing what we're doing, what are we trying to achieve? And then being like, the more we communicate with an open mind, we can have a stance. It's just, we don't want it to be a standoff. We want to have a stance. You can share your stance, share your opinion, but you also have to be open to learning and accepting the fact that maybe there's something new that we can learn, because I know that the new me, the new Kyle, recognizes there's a lot of things that I thought I knew that I just didn't have enough information about. I maybe didn't have enough experience with it, or I just didn't have that epiphany like John, you're referencing there. So that for me is maybe like an action step for anyone to, regardless of which side of the table you're on, is being able to articulate why you believe what you believe and why you're doing what you're doing, but then having the open mind to hear the other side and trying to figure out how do we work together so that we can get to the greater goal together. Because just like Yvette said, your classroom is not a silo. The problem is that we often treat our classrooms like they are, and that is not going to help us get that systemic change that we're after. We might see some growth in our own silo, but as soon as those students leave your silo and go on to the next, is that going to continue, or are they going to have to relearn and retry things over and over and over again? So really working together, I think, is going to be key. And of course, keeping that autonomy with a nice, solid amount of alignment in check, I think is going to be a game winner for you, your school, and your district.
Yeah. I hope you noticed here that we didn't have full answers, but we provided, ways to think about this, ideas, like what we said, epiphanies. We talked about the spectrum is not necessarily a either or. It's not a linear spectrum between autonomy and alignment. It's more of a grid. It's more of a space, and where do we live in that space has to deal with a few areas of our classroom trees. Like we talked about our our soil, our water, our sunlight. These are the things that support and help us grow, which is really in the way that we are thinking about our math classes is our beliefs, is our understandings, our culture of the rooms that we're creating in our own classrooms. Is we talked a lot about that right here, is to think about where do we live in this spectrum, this grid, this space for our own belief around how strongly we hold what we're trying to do in our class, and being open to other interpretations, open to a group mindset across a school or across a school system. The other thing Kyle, just mentioned here is something we call about the leadership, in our vision planning, which is really our trunk of our tree, and having a strong trunk is really, gearing towards like, what are we really trying to do in our classrooms, in our schools, as an educator? What is it that I'm here for? And when we can answer that, that helps clarify and probably position you in a different space on that spectrum, that space between alignment and autonomy. So those are really the two big kind of areas of our tree that we specifically talked about here today. And if you want to know more about that tree, want to know about where you fit on the tree, or which component of your tree, whether it's the leaves or the branches or the limbs or the soil, water, and sunlight, head on over to makemathmoments.com/grow. makemathmoments.com/grow. Fill out that assessment. You'll get a report about the 6 areas of your classroom tree.